If we could have everyone's attention. Sorry that we are interrupting some great conversations, I'm sure, and an excellent lunch. So I would again like to thank staff and everyone who's helped us bring this lunch together. It's been a phenomenal day, and it's going to continue. As we've talked about, the Alliance believes that water is the defining issue of the future. And as we heard this morning from the Atlanta presentation, they talked about a lot of the solutions for this for water is going to come from the municipalities, from the cities, and at the local level. And we all face a lot of challenges, a great deal of challenges, whether it's a water quantity issue with either too much water, floods, or droughts, too little water, or water quality issues with nutrients, with algal blooms, and some of the issues that we have on the drinking water side. You know, they're all coming together at the same time. I almost think like it's one of these defining moments that we're about to face. We've got climate change that falls on top of that as well. And then we're dealing with aging infrastructure that's 85 to 100 years old, that we're all trying to find the financing for it, how to... Can't hear me.
Just turn it up a little bit.
Okay, how's that?
Yeah, I think I'll turn it up a little bit back.
Oh. Can you hear me now?
Can you guys ramp this up?
Yep. So it's one of those defining issues, and we're going to have to address it both from a quantity standpoint, a quality standpoint. Climate change is another issue that we're all facing, and then again trying to finance the repair and replacement and expansion of the infrastructure that we have. One of the scary facts that we know is that there's about 650 water main breaks every day that we have to face, and it's one of those indicators that the infrastructure is aging and that we need to do more to try to address these issues. And I do think, as I said earlier, that this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity. We've got a lot of discussion occurring now at all levels of government with citizens talking about water and how to manage water sustainably, how to protect the environment, strengthen our neighborhoods, expand the opportunities that water might provide to individuals and cities. So it's really fortunate that we have such great leaders here today on this panel to help us talk about how they're leading the efforts in their communities. And you'll see whether it's the quality, the quantity, climate change, these different issues, we're all dealing with it in the same way, but with different drivers that drive that. So immediately to my left, we have Mayor John Dickert from Racine, Wisconsin. If you don't know where Racine is, Chicago is its southern suburb. And so they...
What's my northern suburb?
Milwaukee. And then Mayor Stephanie Miner from Syracuse, New York. And then Council Member Ron Nierenberg from San Antonio, Texas. So we have arid communities, we have water-rich communities talking about the issues that we're facing. So to kick off the panel, as elected officials, you are on the front lines. I'm sure you have different water issues you've had to address with your local municipalities on all the issues we talked about. Tell us how you have addressed those challenges, and I think we'll just go one by one and let each of you kind of have a few minutes to talk about those challenges and how you try to address them, and then we'll start questions. So,
sure.
Mayor Dickert?
I'm gonna divert just a little bit. It's a water term. I'm diverting. I just want to ask everybody in the room a question. How many people here want to pass on all the problems that are going on right now in global climate change and water issues to their kids? Anyone want to pass that on? Anyone? Radica does.
There's always one. There's always one.
And I just joined the Alliance. Thanks a lot, Radica. All right, so that's the right answer, right? Native Americans believe that you have to make every decision based on the seventh generation. We have a Congress that makes decisions based on the next 7 minutes to maybe the next 7 weeks. That's not working for us. So I'm glad you're here, and I'm hoping we're going to get into some good conversation about how to fix these. But we are on the front lines as mayors and council members. We have to deal with this every day because, as you know, everything rolls downhill. And we're at the bottom of the hill. So these are incredible challenges, but as I said yesterday in front of the group that we were with, you are a lot of very smart people, and we're depending on you. So please continue with this alliance, continue with One Water, and solve these problems, because I, as an elected, and I would hope all electeds, stop worrying about the next elections and start worrying about the next generation. Because without it, we will not have given an honest answer to our kids about not passing on that concern. So what are we doing with Racine? When I started 7 years ago, we were kind of the best at the worst. Highest crime, highest unemployment, highest poverty, no development. Wasn't a real good place to start. So we did an immense amount of planning. And that's the thing that we have built into everything, from our infrastructure to our roads, to our utilities, to our parks, to our trees, to our bike paths, to our developments. Everything we have done is a comprehensive planning model. I mean, you're all familiar with the fact that somebody will do a plan and they'll spend a couple $100,000 on it and then it'll sit on a shelf and no one will ever implement the plan. Well, what we are doing in Racine is we are doing specific, targeted, comprehensive plans that blend in 7 or 8 layers to each plan. So let me give you an example of what. One of them is this. We looked at the fact that when you do a road, which is a 20-year repair, which is usually concrete, that the next day a utility can come in and cut a hole in it, right? They have the right to do that in Wisconsin law. So we got a little sick of that and said, that's just not very smart. It also makes the public believe that we're not very good at this. So we created a new process where we inform ahead of time. Instead of taking 6 to 9 months to do a project, we actually project out about 2 years. And we contact all the utilities and say, we're going in at this time when we know we're going to do a road cap, which is a 20-year cap. And we're going to do everything: water, sewer, laterals, energy, stormwater management, LED lights. But if you're a utility, you have to come in then too. Because we're going to work with you and we're going to make this very easy for you. And candidly, they love it because we're digging up the road and we're creating a big hole and a trench for them. It's great. So once that road gets done, we're done for 20 years. But that becomes a part of our long-term mapping of our entire infrastructure. And our goal in Racine is to rebuild our entire infrastructure within 20 years. So some mayor down the road is going to be like, dude, cool. So, but that's forward thinking and taking the time to do that, right? Now, we have had problems where we had a AT&T that just decided they weren't going to do it. And I had a $200,000 piece of equipment sitting there for 3 days that I was paying for. So I called them up with my attorney and said, hey, we're suing you. Next day, they were there doing the work. So sometimes you need to do a little bit of assisting. But the reality is, I believe that the long-term planning and blending of everything, from where we put our community policing stations, to where we do our redevelopment, to how we build our streets, to where we do our LED lights, all of that built together in the same plan, we think has allowed us the opportunity to literally rebuild our city within 20 years. And as you all know, infrastructure is the key to the future. So we're always looking for new ideas, but we have a lot of work to do, and we pray that you're going to be doing it all with us. So thanks.
So as mayor of Syracuse, I got into this problem the old-fashioned way, that there were rivers running down my city in February. And for those of you who have never been to Syracuse in February, water doesn't run down streets in February. It was my great fortune, and I say that actually not tongue-in-cheek, to have become the mayor at a time where our infrastructure went from kind of crumbling to really critical issues. And we've had more water main breaks, and it used to just happen sporadically during the winter with freeze and thaw cycles, and now it's happening year-round. But because of that, I was able to sort of talk to people in a way that captured their attention and resonated about, look, this is what infrastructure means. We all talk about it, but when you wake up in the morning, you can't take a shower, or you can't trust the water that's coming out of your tap, that's a big problem. And when you live or work in Syracuse and you're driving down the road and all of a sudden there's a river there, you start to understand that. So I use it as an opportunity to talk about infrastructure in a very particular way that people could seize onto. And this was years before Flint, Michigan happened. We have in Syracuse an amazing water system. It's 140 years old at different parts of the city. It is a gravity-fed system, and we have no filtration plant. The water is clean. great tasting, and it's plentiful. But our system is old, and in Syracuse, it's very cold. And so what happened then was when I had the public's attention to start talking about this, and then very quickly kind of got ignored by state and federal officials about the issues of, look, you used to pay 80% for these kind of reconstructions, and then the state would pay 13%, and then we, the locality, would pay 7%, and that's disappeared, and look is what's happened. They said, yeah, nobody can cut a ribbon on water mains, so go talk to somebody else. We applied for a grant from the Bloomberg Philanthropies to get an innovation team, in which we were able to get. And I said to the innovation team, I want you to tackle infrastructure. And I did it kind of thinking to myself, maybe this is too big a goal for our team. Because everywhere I went, it's all people were talking about and being really depressed about what the outcomes were. And my innovation team, through very smart people, committed people, hard work, were really able to take the revolution that has happened in technology and data and use it to get supplies like sensors for our water mains. So we are testing them out now. So you can drop these sensors that are relatively inexpensive, I think $13,000, put them in a water manhole, drop it down with a magnet, and it reads the data from the water 24 hours a day. And somebody looks at that data and says, uh-oh, here's a spot. Maybe it's good. Maybe it's a small leak, and that means that we can plan, and we can plan 6 months out when it's nice, when it's June or July, and easier to get into the ground, or when there's not a Syracuse University basketball game on a Final Four weekend when we're playing, to tell all the bars and restaurants, geez, we have to turn off your water. Or maybe it's a catastrophic leak that we know we got to get to soon, so it doesn't end up closing an entire block. We also have realized as we did part of this work that when you use data, you can predictively and proactively start to attack some of these smaller problems. And I think the big unknown piece of information about infrastructure in general and water infrastructure in particular is that the revolution that has gone on in data management and technology can really help us become much more effective and much more efficient in maintaining, repairing, bringing it up to a state of good repair in ways that people haven't traditionally thought about. I was just reading this morning about some of the issues in Flint, Michigan. One of the reasons they're having a hard time figuring out a number to associate with how to fix that problem is because the maps that they have, they don't think that they are, that they do an accurate job. With data technology that we have today, you can do that kind of mapping system and get those exact kind of information that you need to move to the next level. So what we did in Syracuse is said, we're going to use data, we're going to use technology, we're going to be proactive about our management of it, and we're also, in doing that, what we saw very quickly was, while water mains or water may be your entry into talking about infrastructure, infrastructure is really all of the systems together. And so I often talk to my staff about we need to look at roads in 3 dimensions and drop down. So when you're doing a road, because we've had this happen in Syracuse, you do $1 million a mile and you do this beautiful road and it looks terrific, and 10 days later a water main blows up under it, or the utility company comes in and says they have to do an update and they cut a hole in the road. When we do maintenance or repair, then what we should be, or when we're fixing the road or the bridge or whatever it is, we as policymakers or advocates need to think about dropping down and saying all of that infrastructure, we should be doing all at the same time so that we are not wasting precious resources. And so what we have called it is a policy that we've started, a one dig policy, which makes a lot of sense. And candidly, I think people have been saying, oh, we do one dig before and we talk with everybody. But what you're talking about planning forward, about saying that there are consequences to not doing it, and also saying that this is how we have to think about our infrastructure systems, because dollars are so few that you cannot afford to waste them or to be in situations where you're looking at roads that you just spent $1 million on 1 mile and having it blow up because of the water main or the utility, or you want to put dark fiber in there or a sensor or something else. So We have a terrific water main system. I'm thankful every day for the kind of skilled craftsmanship that people did 100 years ago with manual labor and mules. And the way I think about it is thinking about it's now our turn to meet their efforts and say, they were amazing what they did. They built an economy. Those of you who live west of Buffalo in the Erie Canal, we allowed that to happen in Syracuse, so you're welcome. And we in Syracuse are saying we're going to take on the challenge to be even more forward in thinking about how we address infrastructure moving forward and how we use the tools to do that. But it's about, I believe, it's about looking at it as a system and all sorts of systems, and it's also saying we have a whole bunch of new tools that in government we have not used before, and those tools can help us be much more innovative, effective, and efficient with our resources.
Well, first I want to thank the U.S. Water Alliance for having this panel today, especially during the conference, the One Water Summit. It's extremely important that our local communities be talking about this issue. And from a global perspective, we can see how important it is. We just ended the UN Water Decade, and today over half the world's population lives in a state of water scarcity. I come from San Antonio, where we kind of view ourselves as a leading indicator in many of the challenges that are being faced worldwide. In Texas, we are a rapidly urbanizing community. In fact, 80% of the population growth that's occurring is happening in urban centers, and that's very reflective of what's happening across the world, where we reached a tipping point last year. More people now live in urban communities than they do in rural areas, and that's a global issue. So the challenge for us in San Antonio is not just supplying a growing population, and that population is expected to double. The 7th largest city in the United States in terms of population is expected to double in population over the next 35 years. It is trying to figure out how we supply water in places where there isn't much water or that it's regulated. So for 4 years, in fact, the 400 years where San Antonio has been settled, it was settled at the confluence of many waterways. In fact, in San Antonio, we sit over a very rich, plentiful, clean, gravity-fed source of water called the Edwards Aquifer. It is our life spring. It is our reason for our economic strength, because San Antonio is a community in which we have available water, and it requires no filtration, no pumping. San Antonio, though, because of the fact that where we have a system where water is essentially a private property right, there have been over the years lots of battles over that water, and today it is a regulated source of water, so there are pumping restrictions. In the next 35 years, we don't expect that source of water is going to be adequate to supply our water for all of our population, our economic needs. So over the last 25 years, we have been working very hard on two things. How do we get better at diversification, and how do we get better at conservation? In terms of conservation, we've dropped our per capita water use down from a little over 200 gallons per capita per day down to what is now about 120. Extraordinary leap in conservation based on technology in the home, as well as gray water use, one of the largest gray water systems in the United States, as well as new sources of water that don't require additional pumping. In addition to that, we have worked hard to innovate. We have now, as a result of drought, created an aquifer storage and recovery system that now supplies, or that has the ability to contain about half of the year. 6 months water supply for the amount of municipal water use in San Antonio can be stored underground and retrieved during a drought year if necessary. We have just embarked on the largest inland water desal plant in the country, and that is going to be coming online in phases. And we've been working with other communities to make sure that we are not just utilizing the water we have appropriately, but we're sharing water when we need to. So there are a couple of projects right now in the pipeline, no pun intended, that are meant to augment our water supply. And we're using that as an opportunity to do what I call water diplomacy, which is we work with communities along those routes to ensure that they also have an equal partnership in the values of conservation, environmental sensitivity, and so forth. On the wastewater side, we are experiencing the challenges that many aging communities have. San Antonio is about to celebrate its 300th anniversary. I welcome you to our city to join us in that party in a couple of years in 2018. But we have an aging sewer system. We are now under a consent decree from the EPA, so we were working very hard to replace the aged infrastructure that has caused so many sewer system overflows and has periodically threatened the Edwards Aquifer in terms of contamination. So on all these different efforts, we are coping with what is the common concern among urban communities all over this country and all over the world, which is a rapidly growing population and supplying the water necessary that we'll need to feed not just economic growth, but also our population's demands going forward. So that's the story in San Antonio.
Oh, this is great. It's so exciting to have all three of you here. You're just setting the example for everyone else in the country. You've all talked about different ways to integrate water and improvements to infrastructure and so forth. But you can't do it alone. So talk about some of the partnerships that you may have had to form over the efforts to move forward. And Mayor Miner, we'll start with you.
So I can't speak highly enough of the philanthropic community, in particular the Bloomberg Philanthropies, allowed us to attack this problem in a very systematic and thoughtful way. And it's been my experience that through that partnership, we were able to attract other partnerships and do all of this work. And then we saw some of our state partners start to get involved. And then you started to see it become a federal issue as well. And we've been talking about it at the federal level. Now, there are key things that happen along the way. You know, as none of us live in a vacuum, and particularly not in the political environment where we live in. But what the philanthropic community did, allowed us to do, is to think about this problem and give us room to sort of take risks, to think about it in a way where we weren't always, my 2,000 employees, the vast majority of them spend every day trying to put out the metaphorical fires. Some of them actually spend their days putting out literal fires. Having this group, though, and kind of walling them away and saying, I want you to think about this, I want you to talk to people, and I want you to be very thoughtful in a longer-term way, then we really don't have an opportunity to do in a political world and in a city environment. That allowed us to start looking at solutions, and that became attractive to other people when they started seeing the work that we were doing and saying, hey, wait a second, that's not $1 billion, and oh boy, that's really interesting, and we want to talk about that, and we have that same problem. So you start off small, I think, and then you do good work, and along the way, people join. But also along the way, you have other issues that sort of are stakes in the ground. Clearly, what happened in Flint, Michigan, which is completely unacceptable. As an American, it's unacceptable. But what that did is it woke up a lot of the country to saying, I never thought that this could happen in our country, and it happened. And not only did it happen, now all of a sudden, but there's no solution. There's no like, oh, here's the SWAT team to come and fix it. That all of a sudden then started, other policyholders are saying, well, we got to make sure that doesn't happen in the areas that we cover and that we care about. And at the same time, there's a national election going on, and so you're hearing people talk about what are their ideas for the future. And infrastructure is something that everybody talks a lot about. And so when you're in our positions as advocates and elected officials, you have an ability to inform that public policy discussion, to weigh in on it and say, it's not just enough to say, oh, infrastructure. It's great to say, geez, I love roads and bridges, and I don't ever want to have a bridge collapse or a water main break in my district. But we all know that the real issue is, show me the money. So you can stand up and say you care about it, but there's real resources that have to be put to this problem. And those resources have to come from the federal government and the state government.
Councilman?
Yeah, and I would certainly agree with that. In fact, we know as city policymakers, there is a lot of talk about infrastructure, but there's not a whole lot of action. And one of the reasons is it's difficult to assemble the kind of, or the volume of capital that's necessary to do major infrastructure projects. It requires collaboration at every level of government, federal, state, and local. Sometimes requires legislative solutions as well. We were on the Hill as part of the National League of Cities, working with our congressional offices to try to make sure that WRDA got passed. And the challenges for infrastructure are significant, and we have to have a better dialogue with our state and federal governments to accomplish these goals. The fact of the matter is, absolutely, Flint, Michigan should not have happened, but Flint, Michigan will continue to happen under the current environment. We have a continuing push for efficiencies at different government agencies, so much that it costs us an oversight and accountability to the taxpayer. And that oversight and accountability is exactly what created the toxic environment that led to oversight issues, in my opinion. And so, we have to have partnership. We have to have private sector support for certain, public-private partnership opportunities. But by and large, we need more accountability at every level of government to cooperate on infrastructure spending, because it doesn't happen otherwise.
So I guess we have all learned, obviously, that from Flint and from so many different opportunities like Toledo, that water is fragile, right? Drinking water is a very fragile thing. And the American public wakes up to that when there's a crisis, but then as soon as the news stories stop, it goes away, right? As long as people can turn on that tap of water, who cares? I got my water. So that's a blessing and a curse. So as a city, I'm 80,000 people in my city. I have 700 and some employees. And we look to you to be experts because I've got a great water and wastewater department. I would pit them against any of yours, and they're magnificent. Even Kevin, who I think is a global leader in this area. So the fact is that we all were very excited about our groups of people. But we come back to you because you have expertise that oftentimes we don't. And when we're looking to do that next great thing to be innovative and ahead, we're going to come to you. And that's why I'm glad that Radhika put all this together, and this One Water Summit is even talking, because a lot of people in the country don't know you're talking, to be honest with you. They don't know that all these brilliant minds are in one room talking about solving things. But here's the key step. Congress doesn't get it. And part of the reason they don't get it is because they haven't monetized it. We haven't monetized planning, proactive infrastructure repair and build, right? And since we haven't monetized it, we can't say to people together as a collective that, by the way, if you do this now, it'll cost you X, and if you do this in 5 years, it'll cost you X times 4. And I think that's one of the great things about this group coming together. We have to start educating people up the levels to have them understand that investing in infrastructure with long-term plans, with great mayors and council members and administrators, is where we save money, but we protect the fragility of drinking water. And that's why I'm very glad that you're here. I'm glad that you're doing what you're doing because you are really smart people, and I'm not. So keep it up, because the fact is we're going to look to you always for those answers that we need to take ourselves to the next level.
So we're going to take questions in a minute. The last question I'm going to ask the panel really focuses on the future. So we've talked about what you're trying to do. We need financing. We've got aging infrastructure. We've got all these growth concerns that San Antonio's undergoing. What about climate change? How are you trying to integrate some of these climate adaptation approaches into your future infrastructure to make sure that it's resilient, that it'll withstand some of these issues that we have? And Councilman, I'll start with you.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't immediately go to San Antonio when they think of climate change, but we're experiencing it front and center in different ways. Climate is not just an issue for coastal communities. In San Antonio, we have had a fairly consistent level of rainfall over our 400 years. Unfortunately, over the last many decades, we've seen that amount of rain come in very short periods of time. So we've become a community that is extremely prone to flooding. We just came off of another 500-year flood about 2 weeks ago. And that challenges our infrastructure, whether it's the sewer systems that experience more overflows because of the fact that they're just consumed by rainwater and stormwater runoff, or missed opportunities with regard to the drinking supply. We have not innovated enough yet, in my opinion, on technologies as simple as 100-year-old rainwater harvesting techniques. We need to do a better job of that and capturing the new climate reality in San Antonio and throughout the South Texas region. There is a dry water line, they call that, is moving ever westward with regard to the arid climate of West Texas and the more tepid climate of East Texas, where there's more rainfall. So as that line continues to move, we experience more of this on again, off again, periods of drought versus flooding, and that's something that we have to capture. I'm glad the mayor spoke about comprehensive planning, because that's another way that we're tackling this issue. How you grow a city, whether it's your transportation system or it's your land development policies, has a dramatic effect on your ability to supply water in the future. Your per capita water use, for instance. Building a community with smaller yards, with more density in urban centers, can do wonders for your water demand management. And so that's something that we're also incorporating in San Antonio. I'm proud to chair an effort for creating a new comprehensive plan that once and for all takes into account water supply as one of the underpinning foundational elements of a strong city plan.
Well, I mean, if anyone is out in Paris or kind of watched what happened, there was this inner circle of people that were the presidents and the premiers and the leaders of the countries, right? So they got done with this climate action plan, and they said, woohoo, we're done. So what are we going to do? Well, nothing. Because our Congresses and our federal governments and our provincial governments aren't going to really work on this, because there's a lot of people that are still in a cave back in the Cro-Magnon times, and they think that this is, just ridiculous rhetoric. So they turned actually to the mayors. I think there were 758 mayors from about 400 countries there, and said, you're going to have to do this because you're on the ground, number one, and number two, we're not going to get it done at this upper level. And those mayors all turned and said, okay. So then we all got together each other after that and said, what do we have to do? And we know what we have to do, but here's the rub. Like the mayor said, we can only do so much on good faith. Then the rest costs money. So we can do all of the long-term planning, we can do all the infrastructure work, we can blend all this work, we can use all of your expertise, but until people up the chain who actually have the money start funding that, then it's really going to come to somewhat of a slow crawl. So one of the reasons I talked about monetizing this entire conversation is because when you do, that triggers people when you say, hey, if you don't do this, you're going to raise my taxes, because then, of course, people go, oh my gosh, and they use the buzzwords. So we have to get people to understand that if we want to be smart, and if we don't want to pass this on to future generations, we can do it now, and we're willing to help, and we've got all these smart people here who know how to fix this, or we'll figure out a way, but it has to be a collective effort of the states and the federal governments understanding that. That's why a lot of us are challenging the candidates. What is your plan for funding the future of this country? Because we want to know about it, because we're the most efficient people when it comes to spending money. I think we can guarantee that. No one spends it better than we do, because we have to make it work in so many multiple levels. So I'm hoping that we can collectively go out and spread that message so that we get people to understand this is the smart thing to do and actually allow us to really start having this impact. I sit on a state water board, a national water board, and a binational water board, and I work with mayors from around the world on the Mayors Across Borders. And I will tell you, this is not good. There is no bright spot. The only bright spot in this is you and the people that are out there working to fix this. Outside of that, I don't tell my kids what I see coming, because I don't want them to be afraid. So we've got to do this, and we've got to do it right now. And candidly, I said this in Milwaukee at a conference, and holy crap, the place went crazy. But I said, if you support anyone who does not believe in moving the needle forward on this issue, then it's your fault. Because we should not be electing anyone in this country who is ignoring the situation or simply saying, I'm not going to do it because it's tough. Too bad. Get out of office. You know, I don't want to be sexist, but put on your big boy pants, for crying out loud. You know, this is stuff that we have to do now, and I'm not running for office to be here forever. I don't want to be mayor forever. I want to grow up someday. I want to do something. But the reality is, you know, it is time now. We have to stop ignoring this and stop putting people in office who just say, well, you know, you guys will figure it out. Baloney. Put on your big boy pants. Let's get to work.
Maybe that's a good segue to me.
I was I was trying to figure out how to do that, so that was good.
So climate change is not something traditionally that, you know, gets associated with upstate New York because we're not a coastal community and we don't have drought. But last year in May, we had a microburst storm in one particular neighborhood, and I mean one particular discrete neighborhood. I got a phone call, and I wrote about this for a piece I submitted. I got a phone call one night, as my husband was watching a baseball game, and I don't know what I was doing, and my husband said, there's somebody on the phone for you, and she's really upset. So, okay, I get it. She said, this woman said to me, and I could tell that she was somewhat older, she said, Mayor, I don't know what to do. The water is coming up from my basement, and my mother is on oxygen downstairs, and I can't move her up. And I said to her, and I looked out, and it was just drizzling outside of and again, those of you who are not fortunate to be in Syracuse, this is at most, from where she was calling me to my house, a 3-minute drive. And I said, well, what's going on? She said, it's raining, the water's coming up, and I can't get a hold of anybody, and I don't know what to do. And I said to her, give me 10 minutes, and I promise you I'll be right back to you. And I called our dispatch station, the fire department, and I said, what's going on? They said, there's a flood in Eastwood. All of a sudden, within a half an hour, we have 85 calls on hold, and we're trying to get through them, and we're trying to do the best we could. So the woman was fine. We got to her the next day as we're doing our cleanup and saying, okay, what happened? My smart folks said to me, well, we had a storm that was a 120-year level storm. Okay, so storm surge, went through the sewer system, all of those typical things that happen when you have that kind of extreme event. We cleaned up, we explained it to everybody, we figured out this was a 120-year storm. 10 days later, the exact same thing happened. 10 days later. Same neighborhood, same surge, and the rest of the city was dry and fine. So it's upon us. I mean, it's happening. And so this idea of infrastructure, we don't even have enough money right now to bring our systems that were designed and built 100 years ago into a state of good repair. And we need systems that are designed and built for this incredible event that is upon us. And part of what I say when I talk to people about this is, so don't think about state of good repair. You got to think about resiliency, and that whole saying about trying to change a tire when you're going 80 miles an hour down the road. That's where we are in the midst of. But at the same time, I also want to add, I agree with everything that my colleague said about you got to elect people who are willing to tell you the truth. You got to elect people who are willing to make decisions and move forward on this. But in this audience, I also want to say to you, please don't allow public-private partnerships to be the sort of panacea and that everybody walks away, because that's not. And that's where I found now the discussion has gone to. So when I first started having this discussion, it was, we can't cut a ribbon on that. Yeah, we got lots of problems. To now, oh yeah, well, we got problems. So what are we going to do? Oh, public-private partnerships. That's what you're going to do. No. It may work for certain discrete projects, may work for certain cities, may work for a lot of different, but that cannot be the answer to that question and just end it there. There has got to be resources put to this that will allow, because this is a issue for our country and for our system. It is not, therefore this is fundamentally, and this is, I believe that the voters and the people of our country believe this. This is fundamentally a governmental mission to provide safe and dependable infrastructure so that we can build communities and economies and cultures on top of that. And we cannot just say we're going to put it on Wall Street yep, we've done our job. Because what will happen in that case is, again, certain projects that are large enough to shoot off their own revenues will pay for the bonds and they'll get done. So we're in Atlanta and the Atlanta airport expansion, completely appropriately to be done by that way. I just left JFK last night, which was, as Vice President Biden once referred to it, a third world airport. That was my experience yesterday, and I'm a proud New Yorker. Those kind of projects make sense. But Racine, Wisconsin's water system, Syracuse's water system, San Antonio's water system, it most likely does not make sense. And the other part of this, too, I will say to you, is public-private partnerships also means, and I don't want to be sexist, but guys in their big boy pants that cost $1,000 knocking at my door saying, Mayor, you got a problem, we got money, we'll fix it, which, through all of the fancy words and talks means give us your system and we'll take care of it. But there's a reason that they elect us. There's a reason that water is in the hands of the public, because it's a public resource. So we can work together, but I am not anxious, and nor will I, as mayor of the city of Syracuse, turn my water system over to a privately held corporation to determine, is it profitable? Thank you. I say this to these, and they're largely men who come to talk to me about this. I say this to them, I'm going to make sure that water is back on in that house within 24 hours, if not sooner. I'm not going to look at it and do a cost-benefit analysis and see if that house has paid me for the water, or how much they pay me for the water, is it making money, and let them figure it out on their own. That's why people elected me as mayor. That's why they have the system, because I worry about those things, and I'm accountable not to making a profit, but to making sure that the quality of life is at a level that they deserve as Americans.
So Mayor Dickert alluded to the fact that we have all these great minds in the room, and probably 99.99% of the country doesn't know that this is going on. How do we beat the drum on water? How do we get the public more information about what the risks are, what the concerns we have about infrastructure, about climate change? How do we get out there? And I'll just open it up to whoever wants to.
Well, I had an idea that at 12 o'clock on a certain day, we were all going to shut off the water for an hour. And then somebody said we'd get sued. Oh, well. I mean, like everywhere, across the entire country. Just turn it off for an hour. Hey, how's it going? The reality is that, like I said before, it's unfortunate, but once water is turned back on, even in Toledo or in Flint or anywhere else, it's people then forget. It's like everything else. I mean, how many times have you seen a story on the Gulf and what's going on in the Gulf since the oil? Exactly. Now, they're still dealing with it in the Gulf, but the reality is we don't talk about it anymore, right? Because it's not, it bleeds, it leads. We have got to start educating people, and we have got to start supporting people in this country that actually have solutions. Because I worry about you want to talk about cost-benefit analysis. What about the cost-benefit of not doing it? We have to deal with 100-year and 500-year floods right now, and we are structuring our city that 500-year floods are the daily event. Because if you don't, the dramatic impact of it costs you so much money on the back end. So, I just think this is pure education and constantly beating the drum. And I met, where's Jen? Where's my millennial? She's still in here? Hey, Jen. I was talking to her earlier. That's our future right there. She's got her glass bottle water, that she's drinking out of. She worries about this stuff. She's studying about it. She's going to live where it's going to impact her. She's going to live where there's good transportation. All those things about millennials, that's our future right there. So we've got to have this conversation out front, and we've got to make people answer. Instead of just the standard blah, 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 bobblehead Sunday morning answers, we've got to have answers to questions, and we should not stop until they give it to us.
So one of the things I think about water systems that we have going for us is when When you have water main breaks, they make great videos. People are fascinated by it. You see a road blow up. You see gushing water all over the place. And in Syracuse, you'll see snow around it, and men, because my water department, while led by a woman, is staffed mostly by men, in the middle of these big holes. So there's lots of attractive, video to go with that. But I think the real answer is that as advocates, there is strength in numbers, and I think that when you think about water, you should be standing next to the same people who are thinking about roads, who are thinking about bridges, who are thinking about broadband, so that when people talk about infrastructure, we think about it comprehensively, we ask for a comprehensive solution, and each one of those entities that is thinking about their issues, about bridges falling down, or roads that are have so many potholes you can't drive in them, that we're all together saying to our policy makers, you have to solve this problem. And here's how we are, those who are thinking about it a lot and we're active in these arenas, talk to us about it. But don't underestimate the value of just calling attention to it. I am not, by any stretch, a great utilizer of social media. I use it, as mayor, I kind of feel like my life is Facebook. I don't really need to be on Facebook. But that being said, when I first started talking about water infrastructure in Syracuse, I got a lot of attention locally because, again, it was one of those avenues where people saw like it was starting to impact their life, and I used it to say to them, this is why I talk about infrastructure, this is what's so important about it, this is why it matters to you. And the governor came into my city, and the reporters asked him about it. So what about the water system? It's 100 years old and it's breaking. And he said, well, the city should fix its own pipes. And that went viral. Because again, anybody who's been thinking about infrastructure and realizes the history of how our country was built understands that you don't ask localities to fix their own pipes. That's just not the way we do things. And so we started a Twitter site called Fix Our Pipes, and every time there was a water main break, and it started just in the city of Syracuse, and then we were like, you know what, let's bring it to the whole state. And then we started picking up things in the state, and you'd see these incredible water main breaks in Queens, New York. The road is blowing up, and then you go down to the subway station, and water is gushing through it. And then, UCLA had its water main break, and they have a basketball team, so people in Syracuse were interested in that. We saw people surfing, and so you use those opportunities when you may just have a fleeting second of people's attention to use it to really drive that message home. So every time that there's a water main break, every time that there's a storm surge, every time that there's a drought, every time that there's a flood, using that opportunity to say, this is about infrastructure, this is about infrastructure, this is about infrastructure, till you make yourself sick of it and you make all your staff sick of it too. And that's when you're about the point where you've reached where it might resonate.
And I agree with everything that the mayors have said, and I also agree with everything that you said about public-private partnerships. And it comes from this: the challenge for us as a community, as a city, as a nation, is the fact that it's difficult to get these really important conversations in people's living rooms. Period. Whether it's water, or it's elections, or it's transportation funding, whatever it is, people are too distracted by other things in life right now. So for us, and obviously it's very difficult to talk about scarcity of water or drinking supply when you also have folks out in the community saying, it's important that we market ourselves as abundant water. We have as much water as you want, come and put a pipe everywhere. We don't want that. We want to be more mature about the conversation that we have with regard to the fact that water is becoming less and less affordable for a community that's increasingly suffering with socioeconomic disparity issues. We're increasingly challenged by threats to contamination if we don't watch our runoff, for instance, and impaired streams. So I think it comes from being more realistic about the challenges that we face in general with water. And I also think that in terms of a policy framework, what's helped me, and I think what we ought to get to more in our local communities is the consideration that water is a right. We ought to supply water with the notion that every citizen every human in our communities deserves to have access to it. So that should be the framework for any kinds of new projects that come online. That should be the framework for how we do our rate making and so forth.
So as you saw, Radhika passed me a note, and just like my wife, I do everything Radhika tells me. So we're going to do a Q&A afterwards if you just want to come up to the panelists and ask them questions. But I've been asked to ask one last big question. It's the big question. So coming out of the summit, the U.S. Water Alliance is creating a One Water roadmap, which will outline a set of collective priorities to advance the One Water management in America. Based on our conversation today and the conversations that you've heard while you were here, what would be your top recommendation to accelerate those innovations to move forward? We have about 4 minutes.
Work together. We have over 100 water organizations in the United States. The collective power that you have with Congress and with state houses is far greater than you could ever imagine. Work together, and there is nothing you can't accomplish. That's why I'm here. That's why we joined the Water Alliance, and that's why I feel blessed to be up here. You work together, there is nothing you can't do.
Yeah, I would say the same thing, echoing it. Work together and bring on lots of people who maybe water is not their primary concern, but it's part of their concern. So that because to the extent you can have one voice or one place where you're putting down recommendations, I can tell you as a policymaker, that makes my job easier as opposed to meeting with 100 different water folks.
I mean, I would say ditto also, and it work together as a community of water experts, but also work together as a sometimes conflicting set of jurisdictions. Our challenges for water in my area is quite often cross jurisdictions between groundwater conservation districts or between cities. And the more we work together to find one solution for what is, in fact, one water, the better off we'll be.
Can I add one thing? Sure. Al Gore at the Climate Summit in Washington a couple of weeks ago said, there's a brand new economy being created out of climate change. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. There's a lot of new jobs, there's a lot of new skills, there's a lot of new opportunities being built out of this problem. So we have the benefit of also building a bit of a new economy. And that's not a bad thing. So let's utilize this to our benefit in all the different ways that we can.
Why don't you join me in thanking the panelists for a great presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Pleasure.
And thank you very much. That concludes this panel discussion.